I'm Samantha Reed, 32, and last night changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. There I was, sitting across from my parents at Bellamy's, the upscale restaurant they'd chosen for our reunion dinner after 5 years of minimal contact. Between sips of wine, they casually mentioned how disappointed they were that I'd wasted my potential on failed business ventures, while my sister thrived. Then the manager approached our table, smiled warmly at me, and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Reed. Everything is running smoothly for the owner's visit tonight. I know you're probably thinking, what could possibly happen next in a family dinner gone so wrong? Before I tell you how 5 years of family secrets unraveled in a single evening, I'd love to know where you're watching from. The most surprising family revelations always seem to happen in the most public places, don't they? If you've ever had a moment where your family underestimated you, hit that like button and subscribe to join others who understand that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. I grew up in Westfield, Connecticut, in a home where achievement wasn't celebrated. It was expected. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Reed, created an environment where my sister Heather and I competed for their approval from the moment we could walk. Heather, 2 years older and perpetually perfect, set a standard I could never quite reach. While she brought home straight A's, debate trophies, and eventually an acceptance letter to Yale Law, I was developing a passion my parents considered frivolous: cooking. Cooking is a hobby, Samantha, not a career, my mother would say, carefully adjusting her pearls as she examined my latest culinary creation with thinly veiled disappointment. Heather is building a future. My father, a corporate attorney with a perpetual frown, would often add, "No daughter of mine is going to waste her education flipping burgers." What they failed to see was that my interest went beyond the food itself. By 16, I was creating business plans for my future restaurants, calculating profit margins, and studying successful restaurateurs. My entrepreneurial spirit emerged early, but in the Reed household, only certain types of ambition were worthy of recognition. The summer before my senior year of high school, I interned at a local restaurant. While my classmates lounged by pools, I learned inventory management, staff scheduling, and the art of turning a chaotic Saturday night rush into a well-orchestrated symphony. I came home exhausted but exhilarated, my mind buzzing with ideas. My parents saw only the unglamorous hours and my perpetually food-stained clothes. "You could be interning at a law firm like your sister did," my father reminded me weekly. Building connections that matter. To appease them, I applied to their chosen colleges and was accepted to several prestigious universities. The night of my high school graduation, they presented me with a leather-bound planner embossed with Samantha Reed, future attorney. Their vision for my life was so clear, so certain, and so wrong. I compromised by majoring in business at Dartmouth, secretly hoping this would eventually support my culinary dreams while satisfying their desire for prestige. For 3 years, I played the part, maintaining a respectable GPA while spending every spare moment in culinary workshops and restaurant kitchens. I saved tips from weekend restaurant jobs, building a small nest egg for what I really wanted. The breaking point came during my senior year, when law school application season arrived. My parents had already scheduled LSAT prep courses and campus visits. One Sunday dinner at home, they unveiled their master plan. I would attend law school, join my father's firm, and eventually take over his client list. "We've planned everything," my mother said, her voice tight with a happiness that felt more like a vice grip around my future. "Just like Heather, you'll make us proud." That evening, I told them I wouldn't be applying to law school. Instead, I had been accepted to the Culinary Institute of America and planned to attend after graduation. The silence that followed still echoes in my memory. My father's face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen before. "Absolutely not," he finally said. "We didn't invest in your education for you to become a cook." "It's chef," I corrected quietly. "And it's my life." What followed was 3 hours of arguments, ultimatums, and finally, a declaration that would shape the next 5 years of my life. "If you choose this path," my father said, standing to emphasize his authority, "you choose to do it without our support." financial or otherwise. My mother, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, added, "You'll never amount to anything in that world, Samantha. You don't have what it takes." I looked to Heather for support, but she studied her wine glass with sudden interest. Later that night, she came to my childhood bedroom where I was packing. "Sam, maybe they're right," she said, perching on my bed. "The restaurant industry is so unstable. 90% of new restaurants fail in the first year." "I know the statistics," I replied, folding a sweater with unnecessary precision. "I've studied the business inside and out. But why risk it? Law is a sure thing. We could even work together someday." For a moment, I saw genuine concern in her eyes. "I need to do this, Heather. I need to know if I can succeed on my own terms." She hugged me before leaving, whispering, "I'll talk to them. They'll come around." They didn't. The next day, my father's assistant delivered an envelope containing the remainder of that semester's expenses and a note. "This fulfills our financial obligation to your education. Any further choices are your own responsibility."
No signature.
No good luck. Just a financial transaction marking the end of their parental support. I finished my final semester at Dartmouth living on ramen and picking up extra waitressing shifts. My parents didn't attend my graduation. Heather came, but left early for a law firm networking event. I moved to New York with 2 suitcases, my culinary school acceptance letter, and a determination bordering on desperation to prove them wrong. The first year was brutal. I worked 3 jobs to afford a tiny apartment shared with 4 other culinary students. Mornings as a barista, afternoons in classes, evenings waiting tables, and weekends doing prep work at a deli. I collapsed into bed each night with burning feet and cut-covered hands, too exhausted to even miss my family. During holiday breaks, when other students went home, I picked up extra shifts. The Christmas Eve when I was 23 remains particularly vivid. Heather called to say she was in the city with our parents for a celebration dinner. Her law firm had made her the youngest associate on partner track. Would I like to join them? Swallowing my pride, I agreed. They made reservations at the upscale restaurant where I happened to be working that night. I didn't tell them. When I approached their table in my server's uniform, my mother gasped. My father's face hardened into a mask of disapproval. "I can request another server," I offered quietly. "No," my father said coldly. "This is a valuable lesson in choices and consequences." I served them through a fog of humiliation as they celebrated Heather's success, while barely acknowledging my existence beyond food orders. When they left, my father placed a 20% tip on the table, precisely calculated, not a penny more, and said, "At least you're learning a trade." After that night, our contact dwindled to obligatory birthday calls and the occasional stiff email. Heather would reach out sporadically with updates about her ascending career, each message a carefully crafted reminder of what I had supposedly given up. What none of them knew was that I was already building something of my own, something that would eventually change everything. The morning after that disastrous family dinner, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt before. Their dismissal had freed me from seeking their approval. If I was going to fail, at least it would be on my own terms. And if I succeeded, well, that would be entirely mine too. I graduated from culinary school in the top 5% of my class while working full-time. My apartment was a shoebox with a hot plate, my social life non-existent. Every penny went toward living expenses and paying down my student loans. The dream of my own restaurant seemed impossibly distant. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday when I was filling in for a sick colleague at Petite Maison, a French bistro in Chelsea. An elderly man sent back his coq au vin, complaining it wasn't like he remembered from his youth in Lyon. The head chef, already in a foul mood, refused to remake it. I approached the customer, a distinguished-looking gentleman dining alone. "Sir, I apologize for the disappointment. If you'd allow me, I'd like to prepare something special for you." The chef was on break. I slipped into the kitchen and quickly prepared a simplified version of my grandmother's coq au vin recipe, using ingredients I could find and techniques I'd been perfecting. When I served it, the man's eyes widened in surprise. "This," he said after the first bite, "is exactly what I've been missing." That man was Marcus Bellamy, a retired restaurateur who owned 3 successful establishments before selling them to a large restaurant group. He became my mentor, offering me a position as sous chef at his last remaining restaurant, a struggling bistro he kept more out of sentiment than business sense. "The restaurant industry will break your heart," Marcus warned me on my first day. "But it will also show you what you're made of." Under his guidance, I learned the business from every angle. Not just cooking, but purchasing, inventory management, staff training, marketing, and the financial acrobatics required to keep a restaurant afloat. I worked 16-hour days, absorbing everything Marcus taught me while contributing menu ideas that gradually attracted a younger clientele. 2 years into our partnership, Marcus suffered a minor stroke. During his recovery, I took over daily operations, implementing systems I'd been quietly developing. By the time he returned 3 months later, the bistro's revenue had increased by 30%. "You've got the touch, Samantha," he said, reviewing the books with amazement. "You should be running your own place." Around this time, I received an unexpected letter from my grandmother, my father's mother, whom I hadn't seen since childhood due to some long-standing family rift. She was dying and wanted to see me. I took a rare day off and traveled to Connecticut. Grandma Reed lived in a modest nursing home, not the luxury facility I would have expected for a Reed family member. She explained that she and my father had disagreed about money years ago, resulting in their estrangement. She had followed my culinary career through occasional internet searches. "Your father was always afraid of risk," she told me, her voice weak, but her eyes sharp. "He chose security over passion. Don't make the same mistake." When she passed away 2 weeks later, I was surprised to learn she had left me $100,000, her entire savings. The note attached read simply, "For the restaurant you'll build someday. Make it wonderful." My parents contested the will, claiming I had unduly influenced an elderly woman. The legal battle drained $20,000 from my inheritance, but I eventually prevailed. With $80,000 and 7 years of industry experience, I began searching for my opportunity. I found it in a failing Italian restaurant in the West Village, beautiful bones but terrible management, and an outdated menu. The owner was eager to sell before declaring bankruptcy. Using my inheritance as a down payment and securing a high-interest loan that made my stomach churn every time I thought about it, I bought my first restaurant at 27. The first 6 months were a nightmare. I renamed it Reed's and reimagined the menu, but negative reviews from the previous ownership lingered online. The head chef I hired quit after 3 weeks, claiming I was too demanding. A pipe burst in the bathroom, flooding the dining room and forcing a 2-week closure. The loan payments loomed like a guillotine blade. Many nights, I slept on a cot in the office, too exhausted to go home and too anxious to sleep anyway. I cooked, washed dishes, greeted customers, balanced books, and mopped floors, whatever needed doing. My hands developed calluses so thick I could grab hot pans without flinching. The turning point came when Eliza Montgomery, a prominent food blogger with a massive following, stumbled in during a rainstorm. She ordered my signature dish, a modern take on beef bourguignon that incorporated elements of my grandmother's recipe. She posted about it that night, calling it a religious experience disguised as dinner. Suddenly, we had reservations. People were willing to wait. I could finally hire reliable staff and pay them well enough to stay. Within a year, Reed's was profitable. By year 2, we had lines out the door and a write-up in New York Magazine. I opened my second restaurant, Augusta's, named after my grandmother, 18 months later. This one I designed from the ground up. An airy space serving elevated comfort food with an emphasis on local ingredients. The early success of Reed's helped secure better financing terms, and I'd learned enough from my mistakes to avoid the worst first-year pitfalls. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. The landmark Bellamy building, named for a family unrelated to my mentor, had a restaurant space available after its previous tenant, a stuffy French establishment, lost its lease. The location was perfect, but the rent was astronomical and the renovation requirements extensive. Marcus, now retired but still my most trusted advisor, examined the business plan I created. It's risky, he admitted, but I believe in you. In fact, I'd like to be a silent partner. With Marcus's investment and my now established track record, we secured the financing. I named the restaurant Bellamy's in honor of my mentor, though the coincidence with the building's name provided useful cover. This would be my flagship, an upscale American restaurant showcasing the best seasonal ingredients through sophisticated yet approachable cuisine. For this venture, I made a strategic decision. While my other restaurants were publicly associated with me, I kept my ownership of Bellamy's private. I established a management company as the public face, hired Nicholas Chun as general manager, and stayed deliberately in the background. Part of this was practical. I couldn't be physically present at 3 restaurants simultaneously. But I also enjoyed the anonymity, the ability to dine occasionally at my own establishment without the weight of being the owner. The formula worked. Within 6 months, Bellamy's earned a coveted spot on Best New Restaurants lists. After a year, we received our first Michelin star, an achievement that brought me to tears when I heard the news alone in my office. By 32, I had built a restaurant group valued at several $1,000,000. I employed over 100 people across 3 successful establishments. I had finally paid off my student loans and moved into a comfortable apartment in Brooklyn. I drove a modest car, took occasional vacations, and had started dating again after years of having no time for relationships. What I didn't have was a family to share it with. My parents and sister knew nothing of my success, or so I thought. I had carefully avoided press photos, declined profile interviews, and kept a minimal social media presence. When industry recognition came, I accepted awards through representatives or in private ceremonies. This wasn't just pride or spite, though both played their parts. It was self-preservation. Their rejection had nearly broken me once. I wouldn't give them another chance. Then, last month, I received an email from my mother. "We'd like to have dinner with you. It's been too long. We have family matters to discuss." After 5 days of deliberation, I agreed to meet them at Bellamy's, my home turf, though they didn't know it. I made the reservation under my mother's name and instructed the staff to treat me like any other guest. Nicholas, my general manager, was the only one who knew my family would be dining with me. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when I explained the situation. "No," I admitted. "But I'm curious what they want after all this time." I had no idea. I was about to find out in the most dramatic way possible. I spent 3 hours deciding what to wear to dinner with a family who had discarded me. The practical black dress that said successful businesswoman, the designer outfit that screamed financial security. In the end, I chose understated elegance, a navy silk blouse, tailored gray trousers, and a single piece of significant jewelry, a vintage Cartier watch I'd bought myself after Bellamy's first profitable quarter. I arrived at the restaurant 90 minutes early, using my private entrance to check in with the kitchen. Executive Chef Marissa had prepared a special tasting menu for the evening, and I sampled each dish, offering small adjustments. "The lamb needs more acid," I suggested. "And let's add more char to the asparagus." As service began, I slipped into my office to touch up my makeup and quiet my racing thoughts. What did they want after 5 years of near silence? Why now? I'd Googled my father's law firm recently and found nothing amiss. Still prestigious, still profitable. Heather's LinkedIn showed her steady ascent up the legal ladder. There had been no health scares I was aware of, no obvious catalyst for reunion. At precisely 7, I entered the main dining room through the public entrance and approached the host stand. Josiah, my host, played his part perfectly. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting the Reed party," I replied, pretending I hadn't personally designed every element of the space around us. "Of course. They've just been seated. Right this way." My parents had already claimed the prime corner table I'd assigned them. My mother, Eleanor, looked exactly as I remembered. Ash blonde hair styled in an expensive bob, posture perfect, Hermes scarf artfully arranged. My father, Richard had more gray at his temples, but the same stern set to his jaw, the same calculating eyes. "Samantha," my mother said, rising to air-kiss my cheek. "You look healthy." In Reed speak, this meant I hadn't lost weight since she'd last seen me. "You're late," my father noted, checking his Rolex, the real version of the knockoff I'd worn throughout college to maintain appearances. "The reservation was for 7. I replied calmly, taking my seat. "It's 7. "We believe in arriving early," he countered, as though this were a character assessment. The waiter approached, Diego, one of my best, and I silently thanked him for his consummate professionalism as he pretended we'd never spent hours reviewing wine pairings together. "Good evening. May I bring you something from the bar while you review the menu?" My mother ordered a gin martini, my father a Macallan 18. I requested a glass of the Barolo I knew paired perfectly with the lamb I'd just tasted. "Interesting choice," my father commented after Diego left. "That's a $50 glass of wine." The implication was clear. I couldn't afford it. If he only knew I'd personally selected that Barolo during a vineyard tour in Italy last year. "I'm celebrating seeing you both," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My mother launched into a detailed account of their country club's recent renovation disasters, while my father nodded at appropriate intervals. Neither asked what I'd been doing for the past 5 years. I studied them from behind my menu, noting the tension lines around my mother's eyes, the slightly frayed edge of my father's otherwise immaculate cuff. As the drinks arrived, so did my sister. Heather swept in like a conquering general, designer handbag swinging, accompanied by a tall man with perfect teeth and the confident air of old money. "Sorry we're late," she announced without sounding sorry at all. "Bradley had a client call that ran long." "Bradley Winthrop, this is my sister, Samantha." Bradley extended his hand. "The mysterious sister. Heather's told me so little about you, it's made me incredibly curious." I liked him immediately for the subtle dig at my sister. "Nothing mysterious about me. I work in food service." My mother winced at the deliberately humble description. Heather laughed too loudly. "Sam always had unusual interests. Bradley's family owns Winthrop Development. They're breaking ground on a new luxury high-rise next month." "How nice," I said, genuinely unimpressed. Commercial real estate seemed soul-crushing, but Bradley's firm handshake and direct gaze suggested he might be more than Heather's trophy fiancé. As appetizers arrived, I'd instructed the kitchen to send special selections without asking. My father finally broached their purpose. "Samantha, we've been trying to reach you about some family financial matters." "You sent one email after 5 years," I corrected, which I responded to by agreeing to this dinner. My mother frowned. "Don't be difficult, dear. Your father is trying to explain something important." Bradley looked increasingly uncomfortable as he glanced between family members. Heather touched his arm possessively. "The Reed family has a trust," my father continued, "established by my grandfather. You're a beneficiary, along with Heather." This was news to me. "I've never received anything from this trust, because distribution begins at 35 or upon family consensus," he explained, cutting his tuna tartare with surgical precision. "We're approaching you about the latter option." I took a sip of wine, processing this information. "You need my signature to access the money." My mother's smile tightened. "It's more complicated than that. The family investments have faced some challenges recently." "Dad made some bad calls," Heather clarified, earning a glare from our father. "Market adjustments," he corrected. "Temporary setbacks. However, accessing the trust funds now would help stabilize our position." The pieces clicked into place. They hadn't invited me to dinner to reconnect. They needed my signature. My consent to unlock money they couldn't otherwise touch. "I see," I said. "And what about my portion of this trust?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat. "Given your financial history and lack of investment experience, we thought it best if Heather managed the entire portfolio." The audacity was breathtaking. "My financial history? Darling," my mother interjected, "you've never shown aptitude for money management." You chose a notoriously unstable industry. Restaurant work. She whispered the last two words like a shameful diagnosis. 90% of restaurants fail, Heather added, echoing her words from years ago. We're just being practical. Your sister has established herself as financially responsible, my father continued. Partner track at Spencer and Williams. Recently closed the Brookfield acquisition. While you, my mother said with affected sympathy, well, you're still finding your way. Working for someone else's restaurant, living paycheck to paycheck. Our poor daughter, who can't keep a job, my father added with false concern. We worry about your retirement, your future. I sat in stunned silence as they continued outlining their expectations. I would sign over control of my trust portion, they would protect my interests, and perhaps extend a small stipend if I demonstrated financial responsibility. The sheer presumption left me speechless. Diego returned to take our entree orders. My parents and Heather made their selections. When he turned to me, old habit kicked in. Ms. Reed, would you prefer the lamb or the special tonight? My mother's forehead creased in confusion at his familiar tone. My father paused mid-bite. Heather's eyes narrowed slightly. The lamb, Diego. Thank you. I added pointedly, it's perfect tonight. You know the waiter? My mother asked after he left. I told you I work in food service. We all know each other. The conversation mercifully shifted to Bradley's family connections and Heather's recent legal triumph. I half-listened, still processing their breathtaking entitlement, when Nicholas approached our table with a concerned expression. Excuse me for interrupting, he said smoothly. Then, looking directly at me, welcome back, Ms. Reed. Everything is running smoothly for the owner's visit tonight. However, Chef has a question about the Simpson party's dietary restrictions.
Could you spare a moment?
The silence that followed was deafening. Nicholas stood there, clipboard in hand, completely unaware of the bomb he'd just detonated. My mother's martini glass froze halfway to her lips. My father's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and the beginning stages of damage control. Heather's eyes widened almost comically. Owner, my father repeated, his voice unusually high. I had a split-second decision to make. Continue the charade or embrace the truth. 5 years of hidden success suddenly visible. 5 years of their dismissal and doubt exposed as tragically misguided. Thank you, Nicholas, I said calmly. Please tell Chef Marissa that the Simpson party includes 2 shellfish allergies and 1 gluten sensitivity. She has the detailed notes in the reservation system. Of course, Ms. Reed. Also, the wine distributor called about that Burgundy allocation you wanted. I took the liberty of confirming the order. Perfect. That's all for now. Nicholas nodded respectfully and departed, leaving me alone with my family's stunned faces. You work here? My mother finally managed, clearly hoping there was some misunderstanding. Not exactly, I replied, taking a deliberate sip of my Barolo. I own Bellamy's. Bradley let out a low whistle that earned him a sharp elbow from Heather. That's impossible, my father declared. This is one of the most successful restaurants in the city. The waiting list is months long. 3 months for weekend reservations, yes, I confirmed. Though we keep a few tables available for walk-ins. I believe in accessibility. But, my mother sputtered, you said you were in food service. I am. I own 3 restaurants, actually. Reed's in the Village, Augusta's in Soho, and our flagship here. Bellamy's Restaurant Group. My father's face had turned an interesting shade of red. Why didn't you tell us? The question was so absurd, I actually laughed. When would I have told you? During one of our many heart-to-heart calls over the past 5 years? Or perhaps at the family gatherings I wasn't invited to? Heather, always quick to adapt, was already recalculating. Sam, this is amazing. You should have said something. We would have been so proud. Would you? I asked, meeting her gaze directly. As I recall, the last time we spoke about my career, you said I was making a terrible mistake that would end in failure. Before she could respond, my father jumped in, his lawyer instincts kicking into crisis management mode. "I always knew you had a head for business," he declared, as though he'd predicted this outcome all along. "Your mother and I often discussed your entrepreneurial spirit." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. My mother, never to be outdone, was already pivoting to pride. "My daughter, the restaurant mogul. Richard, we must tell the Hendersons. Their son Jonathan is still managing that little cafe, and here's Samantha with 3 restaurants." The speed of their revisionist history was dizzying. Bradley, to his credit, seemed both impressed and uncomfortable with my family's transparent about-face. "So, you're the Samantha Reed who won Rising Restaurateur last year?" he asked. "I attended that gala with my parents." "You weren't at the ceremony. I sent my executive chef to accept," I explained. "I prefer to focus on operations rather than accolades." I could see my family mentally tallying what this meant financially. The calculations practically scrolled across their foreheads like stock tickers. The awkward moment stretched until Diego arrived with our entrees, now treating me with the deference he'd been suppressing all evening. "Chef added the truffle supplement to your lamb, Ms. Reed," she insisted. "Please thank her, Diego." As he carefully arranged our plates, other staff members began finding excuses to approach the table. My sommelier asked about a wine pairing for VIP at another table. The pastry chef wanted approval for a last-minute menu substitution. The assistant manager needed authorization for a complimentary round of drinks for guests celebrating an anniversary. With each interruption, my family witnessed the respect and authority I commanded. The stark contrast to their earlier comments about me being poor and unsuccessful hung in the air like an unpleasant odor. Heather, always strategic, saw an opportunity. "You know, my firm handles restaurant groups like yours. We should talk about your legal representation. I could offer family rates." "I'm happy with my current counsel, thanks." I did mention that my attorney was a senior partner at her firm's main competitor. My father, recovering his composure, shifted to his authoritative boardroom voice. "This changes our trust discussion considerably. With your obvious business acumen, you should definitely have a say in the investment strategy." "How convenient," I observed. "Family should support family," my mother added, reaching across to touch my hand. I resisted the urge to pull away. "We've always believed that." The sheer audacity of their rapid adaptation would have been impressive if it weren't so transparent. 5 minutes ago, I was their poor daughter who couldn't keep a job. Now I was a savvy businesswoman whose financial input they valued. Bradley, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable, excused himself to take a call. When he was safely out of earshot, Heather leaned forward. "Sam, be reasonable. This is wonderful news, but don't let it create more family tension. We're talking about significant trust assets that could benefit all of us." "I'm already financially secure," I replied, "which you would know if you'd shown any interest in my life these past 5 years. My father's jaw tightened. "The past is the past, Samantha. We're looking toward the future now." "A future where you suddenly need my signature," I noted. "A future where we can be a family again," my mother corrected, her eyes teary but calculating. As the dinner continued, I felt a strange sense of detachment, observing their mental gymnastics from a distance. They ordered dessert and coffee, making increasingly transparent attempts to establish their support of my career all along. My mother claimed she'd always told her friends I had such potential. My father insisted he'd only been tough because he knew I could handle challenges. When Bradley returned, he gave me a look of newfound respect that suggested his call had involved a Google search of my professional accomplishments. "Your sommelier just told me about your expansion plans," he said. "A 4th location in Chicago." My family's heads swiveled in unison. "We're in the early stages," I confirmed. "Nothing finalized. If you need real estate connections there, my firm has a strong Chicago presence," Bradley offered. "Samantha," my father interjected, clearly irritated at being out of the loop, "expanding too quickly is risky. You should consult with family before making such decisions." The irony was so thick I could have served it as a dessert special. I signaled to Diego for the check. Unnecessary, of course, but I wanted to end this charade. There won't be a check tonight, he informed the table. Ms. Reed's guests never pay. My mother beamed as though this were a personal compliment rather than standard owner policy. How lovely. We must come again soon. As they gathered their belongings, making plans for future dinners and family gatherings as if the past 5 years of silence had never happened, I remained seated. The storm of emotions I'd suppressed throughout dinner was building, demanding release. I'd like you all to stay a moment longer, I said quietly. We haven't finished our conversation. Their surprised expressions suggested they thought the evening's dramatic revelations had concluded. They had no idea I was just getting started. Have you ever experienced that moment when your family finally sees you for who you really are? When the tables turn and suddenly you're in a position of power after years of being dismissed. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. This next part of my family confrontation gets intense, and I think many of you will relate to finally standing up for yourself after years of playing small. Stay with me as I reveal exactly what happened when I finally told my family exactly what I thought of their sudden interest in my life. As my family reluctantly settled back into their seats, the restaurant had largely emptied. The few remaining diners were engrossed in their own conversations, providing the illusion of privacy in the public space. Nicholas, sensing the tension, discreetly instructed the staff to give our table a wide berth. Samantha, it's getting late, my father said, checking his watch. Perhaps we can continue this discussion another time. No, I replied firmly. We'll continue now. You wanted dinner to discuss family matters. Let's discuss them honestly. I folded my hands on the table, a gesture I'd learned from my father during childhood arguments. A power move he'd recognize. For 5 years, I've built this business without a word of support or interest from any of you. No calls asking how I was doing. No visits to my restaurants. No congratulatory notes when I received industry recognition. We didn't know, my mother began. Because you never asked, I interrupted. The last time we were together, I was serving you at a restaurant while you celebrated Heather's promotion. Heather had the decency to look embarrassed. That was awkward for everyone. Was it? You seemed quite comfortable letting Dad belittle my trade, while you accepted congratulations. My father's expression hardened. You're being dramatic. We simply wanted more for you than waiting tables. And now that you know I own 3 successful restaurants, suddenly you're supportive? Suddenly my financial irresponsibility has transformed into business acumen. People change their minds when presented with new information, he replied stiffly. That's rational thinking. No, that's opportunism. I leaned forward. Let me tell you about the past 5 years you missed. After culinary school, I worked 16-hour days under a mentor who actually believed in me. I lived in an apartment with 4 roommates and a bathroom we shared with cockroaches. I developed recipes at 3 in the morning because that's when the kitchen was available. I described the early years in detail, the calluses, the burns, the exhaustion, the constant fear of failure, the loan payments that kept me awake at night, the critic who initially described my food as ambitiously mediocre, the first employee who quit by throwing a spatula at the wall. The night I found our walk-in refrigerator had failed, spoiling thousands of dollars of inventory I could barely afford to replace. Where were you during any of this? I asked. When I was working 80-hour weeks and living on staff meals because I couldn't afford groceries. When I got food poisoning but still opened the restaurant because I couldn't afford to close for a day. When I had to choose between paying rent and paying my employees. My mother's perfectly maintained exterior showed cracks. You never told us you were struggling. I did. I corrected her. I called when my apartment was broken into. Dad said it was a consequence of poor neighborhood selection and hung up. I emailed when I needed surgery after a kitchen accident. You responded that your country club dues were due that month, so you couldn't help. My father shifted uncomfortably. We thought tough love was appropriate. You'd rejected our guidance. Tough love. I repeated incredulously. Is that what you call disowning your daughter? We never disowned you, my mother protested. You told me I would never amount to anything in the culinary world. You said I didn't have what it takes. You cut me off financially and emotionally because I wouldn't follow the exact path you prescribed. Bradley cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should step outside. No, Heather said quickly, grabbing his arm. This concerns our future too. I turned to my sister. Speaking of which, how is Spencer and Williams these days? Still losing associates to Kendrick and Marshall? Still scrambling after the Westridge account moved their business? Her eyes widened. How do you know about that? The legal and restaurant worlds intersect more than you'd think. The Westridge CEO dines at Bellamy's weekly. He mentioned the change while complimenting our wine list. My father leaned forward. Is Spencer and Williams in trouble? They've had some setbacks, Heather admitted reluctantly. Nothing serious. Is that why you've been interviewing at other firms? I asked innocently. The color drained from her face. How did you? Martin Caldwell. Hiring partner at Frost & Beckman. Regular at Reed's. Mentioned he was impressed with your interview but concerned about your client portfolio. My family stared at me, finally beginning to understand that I wasn't just a successful restaurant owner. I was plugged into circles they'd never imagined I'd access. You've been monitoring us, my father accused.
No.
I've been living my life. Information comes to me naturally, through my businesses. The difference is, I paid attention to information about you, while you ignored everything about me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, a review of Reed's from 3 years ago that had called it the most exciting new restaurant in the village. I placed it on the table. I sent this to you when it was published. The email bounced back as spam. Next came an invitation to Augusta's grand opening. This was returned to sender, address unknown, despite being sent to the home you've lived in for 30 years. Finally, a glossy industry magazine with my photo, one of the few I'd agreed to on the cover. This named me Rising Restaurateur of the Year. I had a copy sent to your office, Dad. Your assistant said you were too busy to accept packages from unknown senders. The evidence of their deliberate disinterest formed a small pile between us. My mother stared at the items, blinking rapidly. We never received these, she insisted weakly. Stop lying, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You received them. You chose to ignore them because acknowledging my success would mean admitting you were wrong. Heather, ever the litigator, tried a different approach. Even if there were communication issues in the past, we're here now. We're trying to reconnect. Isn't that what matters? Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you only reached out when you needed something from me. Access to trust money during a financial setback you haven't fully explained. My father's face flushed. The market has been volatile. Some investments underperformed. The market has been up 17% this year, I countered. And your firm's major clients have all posted record profits. So, what really happened? The silence stretched uncomfortably until my mother broke. Your father made some personal investments. Property developments that didn't go as planned. Speculative investments, he corrected sharply. Calculated risks. Failed risks, I translated. And now you need to access the family trust to cover the losses before anyone notices. Bradley was watching this exchange with increasing discomfort. Heather, you didn't mention any financial troubles when we discussed wedding finances. My sister shot him a warning look. It's not serious. Just a temporary cash flow issue. I turned to Bradley. Did she tell you she's been quietly selling her investment portfolio over the past 3 months? Or that she paid off her condo mortgage suddenly last month despite previously talking about the tax advantages of carrying it? Heather's face contorted with fury. How dare you? Your mortgage payoff is public record, I said calmly. And you bragged about your investment strategy to Chef Marissa's husband at his law firm holiday party, not realizing he was connected to me. My father interjected. This is family business, Samantha. Not for public discussion. Suddenly I'm family? I asked. Convenient timing. My mother reached for my hand again. This time, I pulled away. Darling, families have disagreements. But in times of need, we come together. Your father and I may have been short-sighted about your career path, but we're proud of you now. Now that you know I'm successful. Now that you need my signature on trust documents. Now that my connections might be useful to Heather's faltering career. That's unfair, Heather protested. Is it? Tell me honestly why you're here tonight. Is it because you missed me, or because you need something from me? The silence that followed was answer enough. My father, ever the pragmatist, shifted tactics. The past cannot be changed, Samantha. We can only move forward. The family trust was established for all of us. Your portion is rightfully yours. We're simply suggesting a coordinated approach to managing the assets. With you in control, I noted. With family interests aligned, he corrected. I looked at each of them in turn. My father's calculated expression, my mother's performative distress, my sister's strategic assessment of the situation, and Bradley's growing awareness of the family he was about to join. Here's what I think happened, I said. Dad made risky investments that failed. Rather than admit this to his partners or clients, he needs to cover the losses quickly and quietly. The family trust is the perfect solution, except you need my signature to access it. So, after 5 years of silence, suddenly family connection becomes important. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny my assessment. Meanwhile, Heather's firm is struggling more than she's admitted. She needs connections to stable clients. My restaurants and their high-profile clientele would be valuable networking opportunities. But that only works if we're on speaking terms. Heather's glare could have frozen lava. Mom just wants to avoid social embarrassment. If word gets out about financial troubles, her standing at the country club would suffer. Better to reconcile with the estranged daughter than explain to the Hendersons why you had to cancel your membership. My mother gasped indignantly. How am I doing so far? I asked. Bradley, surprisingly, let out a low whistle of admiration. Impressively accurate, I'd say. Bradley, Heather hissed. He shrugged. I'm beginning to understand why your family dinners are so rare. My father, recognizing the conversation was not proceeding as planned, attempted to regain control. Whatever you may think of our motives, Samantha, family obligations remain. The trust requires your participation.
No, y raplia.
It requires my signature. There's a difference. What do you want? He asked bluntly, the negotiator emerging. What do I want? I repeated, genuinely surprised by the question. After 5 years of being treated like I don't exist, what could I possibly want from you? The question hung in the air between us, bringing us to the heart of the matter. What did I want from these people who had discarded me and now sought to use me? Actually, I said slowly, I do have an answer to that question. And it's probably not what you're expecting. My family leaned forward in anticipation, likely expecting a financial demand, a percentage of the trust, compensation for years of emotional neglect, or some other monetary condition. Even now, they were thinking in transactional terms. I want honesty, I said simply. I want acknowledgement of what actually happened between us. Not this revisionist history where you always believed in me, or were just being tough because you knew I could handle it. My father's expression soured. What purpose would that serve? It would be a start, I replied. A foundation of truth instead of convenient fictions. My mother fidgeted with her napkin. Samantha, families are complicated. Perhaps we weren't as supportive as we could have been. You told me I would fail. I interrupted. You said I didn't have what it takes. You cut me off completely when I needed you most. Those aren't small oversights. They were deliberate choices. Heather sighed dramatically. So you want us to grovel? Is that it? Self-flagellation for not predicting you'd beat the odds in a notoriously difficult industry. I don't want groveling, I said. I want honesty. And I want to understand why you're really here tonight, beyond the trust documents. My father, recognizing the negotiation had moved beyond his comfort zone, sat back.
Fine.
We underestimated you. We believed law was a more stable, prestigious path than culinary arts. We were wrong about your potential in the restaurant industry. Is that sufficient?
It's a start, I said.
Now tell me about the financial situation you're in. He hesitated, glancing at my mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I made some investments through a separate LLC, he began reluctantly. High-end property developments that promise significant returns. The developer had a strong track record, but the projects encountered complications. He means the developer was indicted for fraud, Heather added dryly, along with 2 city inspectors and a zoning official. My eyebrows shot up. You didn't vet this investment? My father's face reddened. The principals came highly recommended by clients I trusted. How much did you lose? I asked. Another uncomfortable silence. 1.2 million, he finally admitted. Bradley let out a low whistle, earning another glare from Heather. Most of it borrowed against other assets, my father continued. Assets that will be called if I can't cover the losses quickly and quietly. Such as your home? Your stake in the law firm? I guessed. He nodded grimly. Among others. I turned to Heather. And your firm? She shifted uncomfortably. We lost 3 major clients in the past year. The partner track I was on has narrowed considerably. I'm still secure, but not as secure as you've led Bradley to believe. I finished for her. Bradley looked at her sharply. Heather, you said the condo payoff came from your bonus.
It did, she insisted.
Just a different kind of bonus than I implied. She sold her investment portfolio at a loss, I explained, to create the appearance of financial stability during your engagement. My sister's composure cracked. You have no right. He deserves to know what he's marrying into, I countered. Just like I deserve to know why you suddenly wanted dinner after 5 years. My mother, sensing the conversation spiraling, intervened. We should have been forthright from the beginning. We're in a difficult position, and yes, we need your signature on the trust documents. But we also genuinely want to reconnect. Your success has made us prouder than you know. My success made me valuable to you. I corrected. There's a difference. The truth hung between us, raw and uncomfortable. My father, ever practical, pressed forward. What would make you willing to sign the documents? Name your terms. I studied him. The man who had shaped my childhood with his expectations, who had cut me off without hesitation when I chose a different path, who now sat across from me needing my help. There was a certain symmetry to the moment, a temptation to savor the reversal. But as I looked around the restaurant, at the space I'd created, the business I'd built despite their predictions of failure, I realized something important. My success hadn't come from proving them wrong. It had come from believing in myself enough to try. I don't want anything from the trust, I said finally. Whatever my portion is, you can have it. Shock registered on their faces. However, I continued, I have conditions for signing. My father nodded cautiously. Go on. First, I want honesty from this point forward. No more manipulations or convenient narratives. Agreed, he said quickly. Second, if we're going to attempt any kind of family relationship, we do it properly. That means family therapy. My mother blanched. Therapy? Reeds absolutely need therapy, I interrupted. Look at us. My father considered this. We could try a session or 2. 6 months minimum, I countered. Weekly sessions. He grimaced but nodded reluctantly. Third, no financial entanglements between us beyond this trust matter. No requests for investments, loans, or using my restaurants for business connections. I've built my success independently, and that's how it stays. Heather frowned at this, but my father agreed. And finally, I said, turning to my sister, no more competition. No more comparisons. If we're going to be family again, we start fresh as equals, not as rival investments in the Reed family portfolio. Heather hesitated, then extended her hand. Equals. I shook it, feeling the first genuine moment of connection we'd had in years. With those conditions, I said, I'll sign whatever you need for the trust. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't need it. My restaurants have made me financially secure. More importantly, they've given me something money can't buy, proof that I was right to follow my passion. My father looked at me with something new in his expression. Not quite respect, not quite regret, but perhaps the beginning of both. I underestimated you, he admitted. We all did. Yes, I agreed. You did. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Can you ever forgive us? That question, so simple yet so loaded, made me pause. Forgiveness wasn't a single decision but a process. The hurt they'd caused couldn't be erased in one evening, no matter how dramatically the power dynamic had shifted. I'm willing to try, I said finally. But it will take time and effort from all of us. Bradley, who had been quietly observing, addressed me directly. For what it's worth, I think you're being incredibly generous. Not everyone would offer a second chance. I'm not doing it for them, I clarified. I'm doing it for me. Carrying anger and resentment takes energy I'd rather put into my restaurants. As the evening drew to a close, we made tentative plans. A signing meeting with the family attorney. A first therapy appointment. A proper tour of my restaurants for them to understand what I'd built. Nicholas approached as they gathered their coats. The car service has arrived for your guests, Ms. Reed. Thank you, Nicholas. My father raised an eyebrow. You arranged transportation? I take care of my guests, I replied. Even the complicated ones. As they prepared to leave, I remained seated. I need a few minutes here. Business matters to attend to. They nodded, our new arrangement still awkward and undefined. My mother hesitated, then stepped forward to embrace me stiffly. My father offered a formal handshake. Heather gave a small wave, guiding Bradley toward the exit. When they were gone, I exhaled deeply, feeling the tension of the evening drain away. Nicholas sat in the chair my father had vacated. You okay, boss? I smiled tiredly. I will be. Family, he said sympathetically. Can't live with them. Can't ban them from your restaurants, I finished, making him laugh. The decision I'd made wasn't perfect. There were no guarantees this reconnection would last or heal the wounds of the past. But I'd chosen a path that preserved my dignity while leaving room for possibility. I hadn't given them power over me again, but I'd left the door open just enough for something new to potentially grow. As I sat in my empty restaurant, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't making them suffer or even flaunting my success. It was the simple, undeniable fact that I had built a meaningful life without them, a life so full and rich that their approval had become unnecessary. That knowledge, more than any trust fund or family reconciliation, was worth everything. 3 months after the dinner that changed everything, I stood in the kitchen of my newest venture, a farm-to-table concept in a renovated firehouse on the edge of Brooklyn. Construction crews worked around me, transforming the historic space into what would become Ember, scheduled to open in 6 weeks. The hood ventilation needs to move 3 inches to the left, I told the project manager, pointing to the massive stainless steel installation. And the prep tables are too close together. Yes, Ms. Reed, he replied, making notes. We'll adjust that today. Running my hand along a partially installed countertop, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the business's projected profitability. This restaurant, unlike my previous ones, would have my name prominently displayed as founder and owner. No more hiding in the background. No more separating my identity from my success. The decision to step into the spotlight hadn't come from vanity, but from a realization that my journey might inspire others. If a chef whose own family had predicted her failure could build a restaurant empire, perhaps others facing similar doubts would find courage in my story. My phone buzzed with a text from Nicholas. Family arrived at Bellamy's for brunch. Table 9. All looking nervous. I smiled slightly. Today marked our 11th family therapy session, scheduled after brunch at my flagship restaurant. The sessions had been predictably difficult. Decades of Reed family dynamics didn't unravel easily. My father still struggled to acknowledge his role in our estrangement, often hiding behind phrases like parental concern, rather than admitting to control and disappointment. My mother vacillated between genuine remorse and social performance, sometimes in the same sentence. Heather had been the biggest surprise. Once the initial shock of our changed dynamic wore off, she seemed almost relieved. During our fourth session, she'd broken down unexpectedly. "I was so jealous of you," she'd admitted. "You had the courage to walk away from their expectations. I never did." That moment of vulnerability had opened a door between us that had been closed since childhood. We'd begun meeting occasionally for coffee, carefully building a relationship based on who we were now rather than who we'd been raised to be. The trust matter had been resolved quickly. I'd signed the necessary documents, transferring control of my portion to help stabilize the family finances. My father had been humbled by this gesture, though he tried not to show it. "It's a loan," he'd insisted. "We'll repay you." "It's a gift," I'd corrected, with the condition that we never discuss it again. As promised, I'd kept my restaurants separate from family entanglements. When my father suggested introducing me to potential investors, I'd politely declined. When Heather mentioned her firm could handle our legal matters at a family discount, I'd reminded her of our agreement. The boundaries I'd established remained firm, though occasionally tested. The most unexpected development had been Bradley. 2 weeks after our dramatic dinner, he'd ended his engagement to Heather. While I hadn't intended to catalyze their breakup, I wasn't entirely surprised. Seeing the Reed family's true dynamics had apparently given him second thoughts about joining our complicated clan. What had surprised me was his request for a meeting afterward. "I've always been interested in restaurant operations," he'd explained over coffee. "My family expected me to join the real estate business, but my passion has always been hospitality." I'd recognized something familiar in his eyes, the same longing for authentic work I'd fought for years earlier. After careful consideration, I'd offered him a position in restaurant operations at Augusta's. His business background proved valuable, and his genuine enthusiasm for the work was undeniable. In 4 months, he'd earned a promotion to assistant manager based solely on merit. Heather had initially been furious about the arrangement, accusing me of stealing her fiancé. But as weeks passed and she observed his genuine happiness in a career he'd chosen for himself, her anger had gradually subsided. "He was never right for me," she admitted during one of our coffee meetings. "I was collecting the right accessories for the perfect life. Prestigious job, suitable husband, condo in the right neighborhood. And now?" I'd asked. She'd smiled ruefully. "Now I'm trying to figure out what I actually want, not what I'm supposed to want. It's terrifying." "Welcome to the club," I told her. My parents had made efforts of their own, though progress came in small increments rather than dramatic transformations. My father had begun asking genuine questions about restaurant operations, occasionally offering business insights that were actually helpful. My mother had stopped introducing me as my daughter who owns restaurants, and started using simply my daughter, Samantha, instead, a subtle but meaningful shift. The therapy sessions had unearthed painful truths. My parents' fixation on prestige stemmed from their own insecurities. My father, from a middle-class background, had clawed his way into elite legal circles and lived in constant fear of being exposed as an imposter. My mother, raised by status-obsessed parents, had never developed an identity separate from social positioning. Their rigid expectations for their daughters had been a desperate attempt to secure their own sense of belonging. Understanding these dynamics didn't excuse their behavior, but it helped explain it. And explanation, while not the same as justification, provided a foundation for potential healing. As I drove from the construction site to Bellamy's for our family brunch, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 3 months. The relationship with my family was still fragile, still being redefined, but it existed, something I wouldn't have thought possible before that fateful dinner. When I arrived at the restaurant, Nicholas met me at the service entrance. "They've been seated for 15 minutes. Your father's already reorganized the silverware twice." I laughed. Some things never change. "Oh, and Marcus called. He'll be here at 2 to review the Chicago location plans." Marcus, my mentor and now business partner, had recently agreed to come out of retirement to help with our national expansion. His pride in my success meant more to me than any family validation ever could. Taking a deep breath, I walked through the kitchen, greeting staff by name, and entered the dining room. My family sat at a corner table, looking slightly out of place in the Sunday brunch crowd. My father in his usual tailored suit, my mother in a conservative dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, Heather in business, casual despite it being the weekend. They spotted me approaching and straightened simultaneously, a Reed family reflex I recognized from childhood. Always present yourself properly in public. Sorry I'm late, I said, taking the empty seat. Construction meeting ran long. How's the new place coming? My father asked, making a genuine effort at interest. On schedule, surprisingly. We're still arguing about kitchen layout, but that's normal. I drove by yesterday, Heather admitted. The building is beautiful. You should have come in, I replied. The interior's coming together nicely. My mother, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. We received the invitation to your opening. Thank you for including us. The formal phrasing revealed her uncertainty about where we stood. 3 months of therapy had begun to thaw the ice, but decades of emotional distance couldn't be overcome so quickly. I'd like you to be there, I said simply. If you want to come. She nodded, blinking rapidly. We do. Diego approached with mimosas, greeting me warmly before taking our food orders. The conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected, touching on neutral topics. A book Heather had recently read, a new exhibit at the museum my mother wanted to visit. As we finished our meal, my father cleared his throat, the sound that had preceded important pronouncements throughout my childhood. Your mother and I have been discussing something we'd like to share with you. I tensed slightly, old reflexes kicking in. Oh, we've decided to sell the house, my mother said. It's too large for just the two of us, and after the financial adjustments we've made, it makes sense to downsize. This was significant. The Reed family home had been their status symbol for 30 years, the setting for strategic dinner parties and social positioning. That's a big change, I observed carefully. My father nodded. The therapy sessions have been illuminating. We've been prioritizing appearances over substance for too long. Coming from him, this was practically a revelation. I managed to hide my surprise. Where will you move? We're looking at condominiums downtown, my mother replied. Something more manageable. And perhaps. She hesitated, perhaps closer to your restaurants. The implication that they wanted geographical proximity to me hung in the air, neither of us quite ready to address it directly. Heather jumped in to fill the silence. I have news too. I've given notice at the firm. This was genuinely shocking. You're leaving law? Not entirely, she clarified. I've accepted a position with the Restaurant Workers Alliance. It's a legal advocacy role for hospitality employees, fair wages, workplace safety, immigration issues. That's unexpected. She smiled slightly. I've spent some time in your kitchens, talked with your staff. There's meaningful work to be done there. My father looked uncomfortable but said nothing, a significant improvement from the argument this news would have provoked months ago. As brunch concluded and we prepared to leave for our therapy appointment, I felt a strange sense of possibility. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take more time and evidence of genuine change. But perhaps something equally valuable, the chance to build relationships based on who we actually were, not who we'd once expected each other to be. Marcus was waiting in my office when we returned from therapy 2 hours later. At 72, he still commanded attention, his chef's hands gnarled but strong, his eyes sharp as ever. How'd it go with the family? He asked, looking up from the Chicago blueprints. Better than expected, I admitted. Still complicated. He nodded understanding. Families usually are. They're coming to the Ember opening. Bold move, he observed. You okay with that? I considered the question carefully. I think so. They're trying in their way. And you? Are you trying too? On my terms, I clarified. I'm not that desperate young culinary student anymore. I don't need their approval. No, he agreed, smiling proudly. You certainly don't. That evening, after reviewing plans for the Chicago location and finalizing the Ember menu, I returned to my apartment in Brooklyn. It was a comfortable space filled with cookbooks, kitchen gadgets, and art collected during my travels, a home that reflected who I'd become without my family's influence. On my desk sat a framed photograph I'd recently updated. For years, it had shown only my culinary school graduation, with Marcus standing proudly beside me. Now I'd added a new image, a slightly awkward family photo taken at Bellamy's a few weeks earlier. My parents, Heather, and me, all looking somewhat uncertain but present. Not perfect, not fully healed, but there. Alongside it stood another frame containing a photo of my restaurant family. Nicholas, Chef Marissa, Diego, and the core team who'd been with me from the early days of Reed's. The people who had believed in me when my own family hadn't. The people who had become my chosen family. The journey from that devastating family dinner years ago to owning multiple successful restaurants hadn't been about revenge. It had been about believing in myself enough to build something meaningful. The ultimate triumph wasn't having my family witness my success. It was that their witness had become unnecessary. I had proven my worth to the only person who really mattered, myself. As I stood looking at those photographs side by side, I realized that the most powerful revenge against those who dismiss your dreams isn't proving them wrong. It's living so fully and authentically that their opinion becomes irrelevant to your happiness. That night, I made notes for a cookbook I'd been planning. One that would tell not just the story of my recipes, but the story of building a life and career against the odds. Perhaps someone else facing family doubt would find courage in my journey from disowned daughter to successful restaurateur. Perhaps someone else would learn what had taken me years to understand, that sometimes the family who truly sees you isn't the one you're born into, but the one you create along the way. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship with family who dismissed your dreams, only to come back when you succeeded? I'd love to hear your stories of standing your ground or setting boundaries with family members who didn't believe in you until you proved them wrong. Drop a comment below sharing your experience with family karma. Hit that like button if you've ever had the satisfaction of proving doubters wrong, and subscribe for more real stories about family dynamics, betrayal, and the sweet taste of success earned on your own terms. Thank you for listening to my journey from disowned daughter to restaurant owner, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't showing others your worth, but discovering it for yourself. Until next time.